Hello Internet, says Skorikowski, and welcome to part 5 of our massive review/overview/game diary for the Epic Traveller campaign, Secrets of the Ancients. Today's thrilling episode will be covering Chapter 5, Otherworld. The chapter itself is 22 pages and is pretty interesting. The travelers aren't simply exploring a new city or a new planet, but an entirely new universe, giving the players something that they have not seen before, at least most likely your players have never seen anything like this before. The opening portion, however, is really just a railroad of the game master just trying to get the player characters to go through a door. But then once they do go through it, everything opens up into this really cool sandbox full of all sorts of just crazy things. It took my players and I about 16 to 18 hours to complete, and we didn't even cover half the stuff that's in this thing. And that's because the adventure includes a ticking time clock aspect, something that I also made a couple changes to make the threat just in the stakes a little bit more obvious and encouraging the player characters to keep moving. While the adventure offers us a ton of cool and interesting things to explore and figure out and sometimes fight, there are some pretty big gaps and some things that don't get explained very well, if at all, which that can lead to a few problems or at least moments of panic as the game master isn't ready for them and the players decide to go one direction and the game master's trying to quickly figure out what to do or what to say or how all this stuff works. So what I'm going to do is offer my tips on how I overcame those aspects and then my personal criticisms and my suggestions as a game master who has successfully run this chapter. But first, let's reintroduce our heroes. They are Lily, our Vargur pilot who is always the voice of reason, or at least that's what she claims. Benjamin, an Aslan retired naval captain with a chest covered in medals. Otter Backett, our mechanic, Bimmy Juffet fan, and newlywed husband on the wildest honeymoon of all time. And finally, Peachy Brevis, a robotics expert scientist who decided to bring his elderly mother along on the adventure of a lifetime. They are joined by Amelia, an astromech droid desperate to prove itself, Dr. Aura Brevis, famed archaeologist and planetologist, whose life path included how she once took a few terms off to open up a bakery only to have it burned down during a planetary revolution, where then she started making bombs to aid the resistance before later returning to her first passion, which is science. And also Peachy's mother. And finally, Hilda Backett, a crab hunter from a primitive tech level 2 world and Otter's newlywed wife. Their ship is the Star Hunter, or New Avalon, or Rayadchi, depending on which transponder code they activate, a souped-up tech level 15 far trader with a paint job that only a Vargur finds subtle. Well, technically at the moment, their ship is a nameless ancient ship, which Peachy has dubbed Squishy Godship, so that's what we're going to call her. A 10,000-ton tech level 25 priceless relic with a few dangerous quirks. But before we go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers, so any players in the audience, please stop here. But send your Game Master this way to see about running Secrets of the Ancients for you. But if you keep going and you spoil yourself, a disassembler robot will collect you for processing. Okay, Game Masters, let's do this. We have got a lot to cover with this chapter. But first, the backstory, which may or may not be entirely true. 350,000 years ago, a mutant droid named Yaskoidre was born. With his supreme intellect and his psionic powers, he made himself immortal, invented the jump drive, and propelled the droid into a starfaring race. He was the first ancient, and he cloned himself with 20 sons, each of them cloning themselves 20 times as well, creating a super intelligent elite. Taking life from Terra, they uplifted wolves and Vargur and seeded various modified human races across the galaxy, giving us the Villani, the Darians, Zodani, and many more. 300,000 years ago, the Ancients' empire was torn apart by a war between the sons. Yaskoidre, who is now referring to himself as grandfather, which is far, far easier to pronounce, fled the final war by taking 3 star systems and folding them into a pocket universe. Now at first he sent his agents into the regular galaxy to hunt for his surviving sons, but as the human and the Vargur and the Aslan and other races all started inventing their own jump technology, Grandfather withdrew further and further into his private universe, conducting his experiments and just ignoring the outer world altogether. When we last left our heroes, they managed to repair Squishy Godship enough that it could finally complete its mission after 300,000 years. It had jumped them to the now empty parsec of Hex 2206 and sent out a signal, opening an enormous teleportal to Grandfather's universe. Coming through the portal, the travelers felt this moment of sickness and then found themselves above a single planet with a single star in the heavens, but no other stars, and the void of space wasn't black, but instead a glowing milky white. Guys, we're in the White Room. Does that mean we're dead? Now the idea here is that because this is a pocket universe that's only 3 parsecs across before it folds back in on itself, essentially if you go far enough into any direction, you're going to come back out the other side. So the light from the 3 stars here has nowhere else to go, so over the millennia it's just kind of built up brighter and brighter with this ambient glow. Now for my game, I allowed a sensors check here, and on a low success, like a 6, they made out thousands upon thousands of stars among this glow, and then on a regular success, they detected 3 main stars that were among them. But then on a difficult success, they recognized that through the signature variations of the 3 main stars, that there was actually only 3 stars in the system, but then reflected back on themselves, just an infinite number of times, giving this illusion of just millions upon millions of stars. Good news, guys, we are not dead. Weird news? We're like one of those colored bits that's tumbling around inside of a kaleidoscope. Descending toward the planet, the travelers passed over these huge and abandoned cities, and the planet once served as a hub for Grandfather's experiments, but it's now abandoned and just serving as this mothballed junkyard. No one has visited this world in at least 5,000 years. Approaching what appeared to be a starport, the travelers could see parked spaceships stretching for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers in every direction. And it's at this time that the empty pods on the ancient ship began breaking off and flying off to these predetermined and seeming random spots among the other ships. Now, to be sure that the group was all together for this, that was the reason that I made the handout at the end of Chapter 4 when the ship jumped, telling them to come back to the bridge for the jump completion. It also helped ensure that no one was inside the Star Hunter for what comes next for it. Again, you can find that handout in the link during Episode 4. Now, once the travelers land, they're met with several disassembly robots who immediately go to work dismantling this ancient ship. If no one is aboard the Star Hunter, it's then carried off to the graveyard far away in Habitat E. Now, the module says that they can retrieve this at the end of Chapter 7, The Death of Grandfather, but the adventure never actually gives us a way for that to even be possible. So it just kind of alludes that it is, but never gives us any way that could even be done. Now, none of the robots talk to the travelers here, and there's no instructions that's given to them. So the travelers are assumed to just sort of wander around all these parked hulks of ancient ships before they find the underground transit tunnels and they make their way to the Starport where they're going to enter the teleporter network.
So it gives us no actual direction and assumes what we're going to do. Well, I can promise you that not only are we not going to do what it assumes, we're going to be frustrated and angry the entire time.
Okay, so a few things here. Because I made several big changes, and I strongly encourage that other game masters use many of these changes or make similar ones for their own game. First, I decided that the layout of the ships might look random from up close, but from afar it's kind of this pattern of colors and sizes and functions where we're clearly following some sort of organization, even if the travelers couldn't tell what it was or how that's possibly optimal. So I made a simple handout of the sea of abandoned ships surrounding the central starport. Next, because I knew the travelers might just take an air raft or a small craft and attempt to fly off somewhere else on this planet, I took advantage of Tech Level 25's ability to do whatever the hell I pleased, and I said that the starport put what's called a gravity lock on all unauthorized gravity drives, meaning that if they tried to get in an air raft, the gravity drives for it just simply wouldn't work. Next, I gave the starport an AI. Now this AI is smart, but it's also very highly specialized to a limited scope, specifically only to the starport and to the landing zones. That's its entire domain, which it is ruler of. Now this AI could be contacted through the traveler's comms, handy information kiosks that could be found in the numerous subway terminals that are scattered around here, and the AI explained that under Grandfather's orders that the gravity locks couldn't be removed without authorization from either the Custodians or Grandfather himself, and that this AI hadn't spoken to Grandfather in several millennia ever since he mothballed the planet. Now, while the player characters wouldn't be able to override the AI's commands here, they could talk it to it into delaying the Star Hunter's disassembly until being the very last ship to be disassembled, meaning that the travelers could, if they talked to it enough, they could have up to 3 weeks to get the proper authorization to stop Star Hunter's disassembly and remove all the gravity locks from the drives.
Okay, cool. We got some information, an objective, and a countdown clock. Awesome. So, how do we get a hold of you people? Because we might have some important news for this Grandfather guy.
Yeah, his estranged son is coming to visit. The AI said that it didn't know. The communications network to Second World had been turned off and couldn't be reactivated without authorization, so the only way that they could send a message would be through conventional radio waves, and that would take 3 years to reach Grandfather's system. 3 years? Yeah, we ain't got that long.
What about these custodians you mentioned?
The AI doesn't know how to reach the custodians, only that they can be found beyond the gates, which are found at the terminal building.
Oh, then we should definitely walk through the gates of that terminal and talk to their manager.
Yeah, you go get him, Karen. I made notes for all of this when I ran the game, covering what all the Starport AI knows and what it can do, as well as information about the Star Hunter when they find it, both during this chapter and later at the end of Chapter 7 if they manage to return. Game Masters wishing to use it can download a copy of that at the link below. Now, I found these changes to be extremely helpful in imparting a little bit of information to the players about where they are, as well as giving them an objective and a goal. It also quelled any worry that they just hop in their air raft and fly off in some random direction, never finding any of the habitats before one of the servitors found them and then just brought them to Grandfather, and we didn't get to do any of the cool stuff that was in this adventure. So yeah, they could, if they wanted to, just charge off in a random direction and miss the actual adventure altogether. And the adventure is perfectly fine with that, and it has a contingency in place. There is tons of abandoned cities and stuff here to explore, and eventually the servitors are going to find them, but I just knew it would be a whole lot more fun for my players and I if they went toward the adventure itself, which is why I gave them a reason to head to the Starport and go through the airlock doors. Anyway, once they enter, they're led through a series of 3 airlocks. The first one scans them to determine their biological needs. Now, because the travelers were mixed species here and had never encountered an Aslan before, it didn't know what to do with them, so it performed a second scan, this one shooting Benjamin with lasers, momentarily illuminating every cell in his body.
That tickled.
It's weird but harmless. Now once complete, the next airlock door opens, and inside the second airlock they're scanned for weapons. Any weapons discovered are displayed as these spinning holograms above them, and then those weapons are disabled. Electronics fused, firing pins melted, and edged blades blasted with microscopic holes, leaving them as soft as chalk. The biggest casualty of all of this was Benjamin, who had these cybernetic augmentations performed on his dew claws, giving him both arc field claw edging and claw hardening. So Benjamin's fancy dew claws were now just soft as chalk.
Ah, my claws! My beautiful tricked out claws! I freaking hate this place!
The travelers can make rolls to fix any mechanical weapons or have the Illuminati repair them once they find them, though the Illuminati can only repair up to tech level 10 items. The third airlock assesses the travelers to determine which of the still functioning habitats are correct for them. Scanning them, a map of the 7 habitats appears above their heads, then all 7 flash red, meaning that none of them are suitable for the travelers. I made a slight change here where the humans, the Illuminati habitat stayed orange for a second or two before flipping red, because they were being close to the Illuminati but weren't quite correct. And then for Lily, the hunter's habitat of C took a second or two before it flipped red because, Lily was a Vargar and that's kinda like a hunter but not quite, and ultimately ruled out. However, Benjamin being Aslan, all the habitat zones immediately turned red for him. Now because the system had ruled that the travelers were all incompatible with any of the functioning zones, the doors to this airlock wouldn't open. Now in truth, the system had dispatched a simpler robot to take them to processing, but they still had a few minutes to figure any way out of this room before it arrived. Now the players asked me to repeat how with the humans and Lily all the zones did turn red, but they hesitated on one particular zone first. So I thought it was all pretty well understood that they'd all failed this test, but that didn't stop Peachy from going, "We gotta kill Benjamin if we want to get out of here, guys."
Whoa, why don't we try plan A first?
The adventure suggests that the travelers might use a disintegrator pistol or ancient's repair tool to open the door. Unfortunately, they never found a repair tool while they were on Squishy God's ship, so they couldn't use that to open the door or to repair their disabled disintegrators. But Benjamin found a vent in the wall 10 meters up, so using his Nano Hero drone, he was able to squeeze that through, and then he piloted this drone through different ducts, hoping to reach the opposite side of the locked door and then just open it from the far side by having the drone, jump up and down on the button. So we rolled to see if he reached the door before the disassembly robot, but we ended up tying on that, so they reached it at the same time. So he was still at the vent when he saw this robot coming up the hall, so Benjamin decided to wait to see what happened. So the robot went up to the door, and when the airlock door opened with this big disassembly bot just floating at the entrance, Peachy yelled, "It's coming to kill you!" And then Peachy fled, leaving Benjamin to die. Now, because of the other players and we had all discussed how everyone had clearly failed this compatibility test, I just figured that Peachy's player was simply role-playing all of this. Then after the game, one of the players and we were talking, and she was insistent that no, he wasn't role-playing. He really did think that Benjamin was the one that needed to die for everybody to get out of this room. And I was like, no way, he was just simply role-playing all that. And then the week after the game, I was talking to Peachy's player on the phone, and he mentioned how during the session I had spent that robot in to kill Benjamin, meaning that the player definitely he wasn't role-playing that. He definitely thought that they were supposed to kill Benjamin or have this robot kill him, and he had completely missed all of the part where everybody had really in detail discussed what they thought this meant. He just kind of made up his mind of what it meant, and all the new information that they got or all the clarification that just was completely ignored, or he just somehow missed it. So evidently he just thinks that I'm the type of GM that would put them in a room and say, you got to kill one of your own to get him out. So yeah, players. Anyway, so the adventure says how the travelers can simply dodge past this robot and head off to the transit system, which would make sense. This is a 3-meter tall, armored, tech level 25 robot, and the travelers have just lost most, if not all, of their weapons here. But these are player characters here, and smart ain't what they do. So what followed was a weird comedy of errors, as player characters kept jumping on this thing, trying to wrestle it. Like they're actually just trying to engage in just hand-to-hand melee against this thing, and they're failing their rolls, and they're getting hurled against walls and getting, thrown up against the floor and pretty much getting their asses handed to them by this robot that's just casually going through the room. But then as things looked their most grim, a hero rose. Amelia charged into the fray with her cutting torch, which does 3D damage and is armor-piercing 4. So as everyone else was hanging off of this thing, she made quick work of this robot, slicing it open and spilling its robot guts all across the floor.
That's my girl. Remind me to never bum rush a robot again.
Do you even think that would stop you? The transport hub is just a larger version of the teleporter network that they encountered on Squishy Godship, and they can set it for the different habitat that they like. However, Habitat 6, the Custodian, is currently locked, so they cannot teleport straight there. Habitat 7 is the spaceport where they begin, but once they go through that door, they're going to discover that they cannot go back and get back to the spaceport. Now, one thing with these habitats is that the transit key and much of the adventure text refers to them as locations 0 through 7, but the habitat map, which lists them as A through H, which I prefer, but the numbers appear to be a holdover from the first edition version of this adventure, which listed all of the habitats by number. Also, because the map has all of the location tags already on it, I photoshopped them out to use this as a player version. Game Masters can find a copy of my modified map at the download link below. Anyway, the habitat complex has a whole lot to it, but most of it is really just half described. It's said to house some of Grandfather's experiments that he sort of lost interest in or forgot about over the millennia, but I prefer to think of this as just one big ongoing long-term experiment. Like he plans to revisit this and see how it came out after, another 100,000 years or so. It's divided into several habitat zones, each separated by natural features such as steep mountains. Now, one thing I added here is while the habitats, with the exception of Habitat G, is outside and exposed to the elements, I added a faintly visible energy dome above the whole thing, and just over the entire map here. And it doesn't stop anything from entering or exiting through this energy dome, just kind of, part of the experiment itself. But what it does is it records anything and everything that passes through this dome and keeps track of it. So if any of the occupants, including the travelers, were to just pass through this dome, the custodians over the whole thing would be notified that somebody had passed through the dome, and they would be sent to investigate. Essentially, this is just to explain why the Hunters haven't escaped this place and taken over the whole planet, or to serve as a contingency in case this players made a hot air balloon and just flew back to the starport. Habitat A is the Illimdaki, a modified human race intended to be the perfect lab assistants. They're born with the memories from the previous generation, meaning that they can talk as babies once their palate and everything have developed enough to allow speech. They have a +4 to their education, and all of them have Mechanics 5, all engineering skills at rank 5, and several of the sciences also at rank 5. However, they also lack any imagination or innovation. They live at about tech level 3, but all have the skills and know-how now to be living at tech level 16, and the only reason that they don't have flying cars and robots is simply that it hasn't occurred to them that they could do that. They really remind me of the Star Children from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. They can rewire a complex piece of machinery in mere minutes, but lack all innovation themselves. I mean, these are the Star Children, and the Illuminati called themselves the inheritors of the stars, so maybe that's a coincidence. Habitat C is the Hunters of Men. These are a subspecies of Vargur with enhanced physical stats that are all super genius intelligent. They can gain any skill, whether they're learning a language or piloting a plane, in only a few rounds, and be at skill rank 2 in only a couple of hours. They are ultra intelligent. However, they have genetic blockers against cooperation. They lack all empathy altogether. They're extremely paranoid and cruel and sadistic. I believe I dated one of these things once. The only thing that will allow these hunters to temporarily put aside their hatred for one another and actually work together is their shared hatred of the Illuminati. Habitat D is the Hungry Swamp. This is more of a living weapon than anything else. The swamp is essentially one enormous acidic stomach that's populated with these horrible squid-like creatures that kill their prey and they drag it back into the acidic bog to be digested. And I don't really see these squids as being sentient themselves, but almost like drones or something that the larger organism sends out. It serves as one half of the reset system that can be deployed against any of the main habitats. There's a command center that's hidden deep in the swamp, and the travelers, if they discover it, might figure out how to use this thing. Habitat F is the Death Zone, and this is a natural selection pen for some extremely nasty creatures that Grandfather has made. Now, to keep these things from overrunning all the other habitats, the Death Zone is set at a much lower elevation than the rest and in a very oxygen-rich environment, meaning that the creatures can only survive down here. Now, if the travelers wish to get to the Custodians at Habitat G, they have to cross the Death Zone. Now, they may fight their way through it or fly over it or just, go down there and mess with the oxygen emitters to either lower the oxygen so all the creatures down here just suffocate and die, or they might raise the oxygen and just start a fire and clear the whole place out, or some other clever idea that they might come up with. Also, the map doesn't show the Death Zone teleporter gate, so I went ahead and stuck that here. Habitat E isn't much of a habitat, it's just a big junkyard of broken experiments that's called the Graveyard. It is a huge sprawl of discarded and partially functioning high technology, and there is some dangerous things that the travelers might stumble across here. There are these enormous robots that wander around breaking down machinery, and it never says what they do with any of this stuff once they break it down, so I had them making these compressed cubes of different materials, such as iron, nickel, gold, various exotic materials, and then just deposit those in certain locations. These just big stacks of these cubes. This is where the Star Hunter was sent by the Starport AI once the travelers initially arrived. Because my players had managed to talk the Starport AI into holding off on destroying the Star Hunter for a few weeks, the scavenger robots had left this thing alone. If the travelers had not been able to persuade the AI to delay the Star Hunter's destruction, once they arrived here, they'd hopefully arrive just in time as one of these robots started tearing apart the ship, and hopefully they could manage to stop the robot from destroying their ship. Finally, Habitat B. Now, this is one of the most interesting and least explained features here. This thing is a big deal, and they don't really kind of make any sort of big deal about it. It serves as the second half of the reset system for this entire place. Within all of the habitats are these mosquito-sized robots that are just flying around, and these things gather genetic samples to this enormous cloning facility here. So if you die in the habitats, you come back as a clone in just a few hours. The Illuminati, who aren't quite imaginative enough to believe in a god and pretty much understand what this facility is, they still revere this machine as some sort of deity or a gift from the maker, and they have a priest here. Now, this is everything that we know about this facility, and it leaves me with a lot more questions than answers, like, what is it the clones remember when they come back? Do the clones come back out at the facility, or do they just pop out there and they have to walk back home, meaning that you might have hunters and Illuminati be popping out right next to each other, and how would that that even work here? The monsters from the death zone, if they popped up here, they would die as soon as they were released because there wasn't enough oxygen here. So I assume that anything that's cloned and brought back is then immediately sent back to its habitat. And then also, what about cybernetic augments? What if the travelers died and they've got, cybernetic implants? Do those come back with them, or do they not have them at all? What all is involved in increasing or decreasing a clone's age? Because it's alluded to that you might be able to mess with whatever their final age is once they come out. So I made a few rules here to help me out with answering all of these questions and more. I stick a link down in the video description. Game Masters, of course, you can do this however you feel best, but I feel that these are some of the areas that Game Masters should have some answers to before they start the session and they suddenly find themselves in a situation where they have to think about this stuff for the first time and might not be initially happy with whatever it is they immediately say because they haven't really had time to think about it. So for our game, the travelers teleported to Habitat A. Now, shortly after they arrived, they met with a farmer named Ashur. He casually mentioned how he'd never seen a creature like Benjamin before, but without any fear or thought to ask him what it was he was or where it was he came from. He then asked Lily if she was a hunter, and Lily shrugged and said, yeah, and that's how Lily nearly got shot in the face. So after talking Ashur down, he offered to take them to the city in his steam car to meet the Queen of Rifles. Now once there, the Queen, who is the smartest of all the Illuminati with a staggering intelligence of 4, implored the travelers to help them against the hunters.
Look, these hunters are obviously just regular Varga, and this is all some big racist misunderstanding. I'm sure we can go talk to them and broker a peace.
Yeah, these people are just backwater simpletons. I mean, yeah, sure, they fixed all of our weapons, and that baby over there was talking about the advanced physics of the regenerative qualities, the nanotube alignments of our armor, but that's not weird. During their conversation with her, the Queen asked the travelers about the light up in the heavens, and the travelers saw that the portal gate high in the sky was glowing blue with radiation, meaning that Seven was on the other side of the portal gate, ripping it open. It'd only be a matter of days before the murderous ancient tore its way into this universe. The travelers learned that while the Illuminati could repair any of their items up to tech level 10, and they could construct anything up to tech level 6 with everything else that they have just where they are here, the biggest hindrance was just the tools and supplies to help them make bigger and more advanced stuff. But if they could get the Illuminati over to the graveyard on the far side of the habitat complex, all that advanced material there, the Illuminati could easily do far more than they could do here. So the travelers agreed to do a trade and helping each other out with this. Now, one problem with the book is the information about the Illuminati and how they can repair and construct all the technology that is spread out between multiple sections of the adventure, such as repairing the travelers' disabled weapons, as mentioned several pages before we even meet the Illuminati in the first place. So once we encounter them, Game Masters then have to flip back several pages in order to see what tech level it is that they can repair. And there are some listed in the scene with the Queen and the castle as far as what they can do, and more is listed in the section with the graveyard, which is several pages after that, and then more is listed in the very back of the adventure. So Game Masters, when you're running this game and the subject comes up, you're going to be flipping back and forth a lot if you don't organize your notes first as far as what all it is that the Illuminati can do with different technology. Meanwhile, when the travelers used the teleporter portal for the first time, it activated the entire network. The hunters in Habitat C noticed this and quickly figured out how to operate the portal transits. Now, they then used these teleporters to launch a full-scale invasion behind the Illuminati's defenses. So the city began receiving news of this army of hunters just murdering their way towards them, and they had about an hour or so before all these hunters arrived. So the travelers began helping the Illuminati prepare. Peachy taught them about Molotov cocktails, and we then went in great and painful detail. He was carefully teaching them how these things worked and how he didn't want to upset the power balance of this entire place by introducing these higher concepts to these clearly primitive and mentally deficient people, but also who they're more likely to hurt themselves than anybody else. So he was really treating them like children. He was trying to introduce this to them very slowly. Meanwhile, Otter taught them about rifle-mounted grenade launchers, and the Illuminati started constructing dozens of grenades and perfectly functioning launchers to mount onto their primitive muskets. And his training to them for them was pretty much pull trigger, go boom, yeehaw. As the hunter horde loomed closer, Lily insisted that she and Benjamin go speak with them and negotiate a peace. So they took a steam car out and waited for the horde to arrive, about a kilometer or so outside the city. She gave this impassioned speech how there was a much bigger threat coming for them all, and the only way to defeat it was if everyone worked together and put aside their differences. The hunters replied with a few hundred of them chanting their cant, how they are going to kill God, and howling and working themselves up into this blood frenzy. It was a valiant attempt, and I'm very personally impressed that Lily and Benjamin managed to escape this whole situation with their freaking lives. But once they were safely back inside the city walls, Lily concluded,
"Those are not Vaga. Those are super genius psycho werewolves, and I have no problem murdering every single one of them."
"Finally, let's rock and roll." Now, this battle doesn't need to be played out round for round or anything like that. It's 50,000 Illuminati against 5,000 hunters, and this can all be resolved with a single tactics check. So I asked each of the players what it was that they intended to do during this siege in very broad strokes, such as, I'm leading a squad to hold the eastern wall with firebombs and rifles while maintaining radio contact with the rest of the team. They just have to give me kind of a broad stroke general idea of what it is that they were planning on doing during this entire battle. You can also do this as a task chain, where you simply give them a +1 if the travelers are using high-tech weaponry, or if the Illuminati have access to superior technology. And then once everyone has said what their plan is, one player, in our case Benjamin, rolls a tactics check to see how this entire battle plays out. Then you just narrate how this huge siege went down and how all the numbers fell by the time it was done. So for our game, Benjamin knocked this roll out of the park, getting a 14 on his tactics check, meaning that they killed almost 5,000 hunters at the cost of 5,000 Illuminati over the course of this 5-hour battle. That night, as they curled into their beds in the castle, heroes of the Illuminati for defeating the hunters, and it was the end of that session that night, I decided to close that session out on a hook. So among the many weird things in the graveyard habitat is an insane AI. Now, because the travelers had said that they were using their suit radios during the course of this battle, the AI overheard those transmissions. So just before they fell asleep, Otter got this call from this AI demanding that they come and save it, and how death was imminent as the sun was coming to confront his jerk-faced father, and how the universe was doomed without this AI's help. Now, because Otter was wasting all this valuable time by asking really stupid questions such as, who are you? How did you get this number? And what the hell are you even talking about? The AI declared him as being an ignorant monkey and hung up on him. It then called Lily, saying much of the same things. She managed to uncover that this thing was in the graveyard and its fortress of solitude was under assault. She agreed to come help it, and the AI declared that she was a very good girl.
I don't know if I should be insulted or not. On the one hand, that was clearly a dog joke. On the other hand, I am a good girl. I'm the best.
Now, this AI is insane. It's part of the reason that grandfather threw the thing away in the first place, but among its nonsense and paranoid delusions is a very good way to impart some valuable backstory information to the players. And I have modeled a lot of my depiction of this thing off of Skippy from the Expeditionary Force series, and the way it would talk down to them, and also lose track of what it was saying, and also have kind of a joy of singing opera. Now, at one point, Otter asked it a really simple question, and then it started a 6-hour lecture on the chemical makeup of the various stars in the Pocket Universe, and it couldn't be interrupted for 6 full hours as it was giving this lecture, and they just kind of turned off their radios. The travelers initially tried using the transport hubs to get to the graveyard, but after the devastating loss by the hunters and the time that had passed since the previous day, there had been a 4-hour period that the transport network hadn't been used, in which case it returned to its dormant state and could not be reactivated. So the travelers would need to physically cross the distance to get over to the graveyard. But taking advantage of the Illuminati, they constructed a giant hot air blimp with steam-powered engines, and it was pretty freaking awesome. And with it, the travelers and 4 Illuminati flew across the entire expanse to the graveyard. They located the Star Hunter and grabbed any backup weapons and supplies that were inside, and they charged off to the AI's location. They found this pyramid that had this huge wall of trash around it, which is why none of the drones down there had even seen the thing. And one of these scavenger drones, or I don't know why they call them drones, they're more of robots, but they're about the size of garbage trucks. It's been chewing its way through this this wall and was now beginning to burrow into this pyramid, which is why the AI was panicking. Lily ordered Amelia to stay back with the blimp and not put itself in danger, but she rolled a terrible persuade roll, and Amelia was all, "Yeah, sure, I'll stay safely in the back, don't worry."
She isn't going to stay back at the blimp, is she?
Would you?
Shit.
The battle against this big drone was pretty damn brutal. One of the Illuminati was almost instantly killed in the first round against this thing, and mist grenades were flying every which way and exploding. One of them nearly blew up Peachy's mom, and the only reason that she survived was thanks to a luck roll, because we used the optional luck rolls from the Traveller Companion. And then, as it looked like all was lost, Amelia came charging up through that valley, through the chewed-through wall, and was promptly eviscerated by the giant drone in a single hit.
Motherfucker! Ah!
Eventually, they took this drone out. The Illuminati got to repairing Amelia as the travelers ventured into this pyramid, and that's when they discovered that the inside of this thing was incredibly radioactive, a detail that the AI hadn't really thought was worth mentioning to them. The Illuminati then began salvaging some equipment, and the adventure is extremely generous as far as what it is the Illuminati can do with all of this stuff here. Essentially, it takes them 1d6 hours to assemble anything up to tech level 14, smaller than 30 tons. Power armor, grav tanks, anything. So generous that this took my players a few times of me repeating it before they finally accepted that what I was saying didn't come with any strings attached, or like maybe they could build this thing, but they didn't know how to program the computers that could do its operating system or anything. But finally, Lily was all like, "Hey, can you make me a tech level 14 Vargar battle dress?" And in a couple hours, they gave it to her. Now, seeing that, all of them started tearing through the central supply catalog just shopping for toys. Now, one thing that I did stress is while the Illuminati made equipment works perfectly fine, it is ugly because it's made of trash. So while your character's battle dress functions just like the Iron Man Mark V, it looks like an Iron Man Mark I. Now, with the gravity locks that I had come up with for the Starport portion, I decided that those only applied to vehicles that had arrived in through the Starport. So any grav belts or flying vehicles that the Illuminati constructed at the graveyard wouldn't be affected by that. So the Illuminati could still make flying vehicles or flying equipment because they were constructing it here and it hadn't gone through the Starport. Now, Peachy designed this drone that was pretty much a mechanical spider with this lead-lined box on the top of it that he sent into this pyramid to recover the AI. Now, the AI at the time was talking about how it was going to get revenge on Grandfather, and Grandfather's day of reckoning was coming because the mathematical formula for toast was pi. And honestly, I have no idea why it was that they continued to trust this crazy thing. Oh, it is clearly insane and cannot be trusted, but everything else in this universe is insane and can't be trusted, which really makes it the only thing here that we can't trust.
He's got a point.
So, with Skippy in tow, the travelers all suited up into their own battle dress armor and loaded onto a helicopter and flew to the Custodian's tower, bypassing all the cool monsters in the death zone, which would have been really cool to fight those while they had battle dress, but they also had a helicopter. Upon arrival, the travelers were met with a Custodian robot. At first, it mistook them for being escaped Illuminati and Lily being an escaped hunter, but then it was quickly convinced that they were from the outer universe. The AI began raving at this thing how it was time to attack, so the Custodian casually annihilated it with his disintegrator beam. It then captured the travelers in a gravity projector field and carried them into the transport hub. Now, this transporter is different from all the ones that the travelers had seen before, because once they were inside of it, it then teleported them a full parsec to Grandfather's domain. Now, one thing that I changed here is that all of the travelers' weapons and all their dangerous equipment didn't teleport with them. Like, basically, all their suits of armor just fell empty to the ground. Now, first, while Grandfather is extremely powerful, he's the most powerful being in the universe as far as we know, it's still probably a bad idea to let a pack of incredibly armed and armored strangers just into Grandfather's presence. Second, I thought it would just make Chapter 7 a whole lot more interesting if the travelers started that chapter without not having all of their uber high-tech toys, including Amelia. Amelia stayed behind too. She didn't go through the transporter with everybody because the Custodian didn't see her as being sentient. She actually is only advanced enough that she thinks she's sentient, but she's not quite there. So the Custodian just saw her as this piece of equipment and not bringing her before Grandfather. So with a flash of light and a brief loss of consciousness, the travelers found themselves aboard this enormous space station overlooking a planet completely covered in twisting, almost living metal, like some sort of colossal version of those floating turrets that they'd seen aboard Squishy Godship. And an intuitive sense told them that this entire planet had been converted into a giant weapon. A trio of robots arrived, welcoming the travelers and telling them that their arrival was a surprise, but they were welcome here. They then brought the travelers before a small droid who was hovering above a command console, and the weight of this droid's godlike intelligence and psionic powers hit them like a wave. He introduced himself as Grandfather and told them that they were in danger as psychic images of Seven breaching the gate of this pocket universe flashed inside their minds. Grandfather lifted his hand, saying, "You must understand," and everything flashed white. Thus ending Chapter 5. Overall, this was a pretty fun adventure. We had a great time playing it, but at the same time, it mostly serves as a means of learning how Grandfather's pocket universe works and how Grandfather treats entire cultures as basically being these forgotten and discarded experiments and indifferent to all the people suffering inside of them. We get a lot of really cool and really weird technology, but much of it, such as the whole cloning facility and how that even works, that's not explained to us at all. There's a lot of stuff here, but in the end, none of this stuff even matters. The whole adventure is simply the journey of entering the pocket universe and getting to Grandfather. None of what they do with the Illuminati or the Hunters is going to make any real difference for these things in the long run, because we'll probably never see them again in the larger plot, and they're also all about to be destroyed in Chapter 7, so it doesn't really matter here. The important thing here is that Game Masters show how insanely advanced the technology here is. I mean, it's pretty much magic at this point, but it's also stagnant and decaying. It's also good to introduce the concept of how death is no longer even a hindrance once you hit tech level 25. For the campaign, that started with Uncle Vlyn, and as of the larger part for the second half of the campaign, immortality through cloning is a very important concept that a lot of the plot's going to be hinging on, but there really isn't anything that the travelers have to learn or have to change while they're here inside this realm, so I can't help but feel that this is more of a filler chapter than anything else. It even says that no matter what the players do, even if they dawdle too long or refuse to even enter the Starport transit hub and just explore the planet on foot, that the Custodians will eventually find them and bring them before Grandfather. Now, talking to my players about all this after we had run the game, they really did like this adventure and it held their interest the entire time. They loved the huge battle defending the city and flying the steam-powered airship across the whole place. They ate that stuff up. I mean, it was pretty damn cool. So maybe this is more of just my own personal feelings towards this chapter, because I find every chapter after this one to be far more interesting than this one. And maybe deep down I was just looking forward to kind of getting through this one and on to the more fun stuff that I was more excited about, because I knew everything that was in this chapter. It didn't have all the wonder and surprises for me, and I know all the cool stuff coming up, and I really look forward to getting to that stuff. So maybe that's just my perception of it, because I was the one reading the book, while the players, they had a really good time with it. My biggest suggestions with this chapter are adding a Starport AI much like the way I did, as a way to guide them toward the transport hub, but also give the players a little bit of initial information about this universe, as well as giving them some sort of upfront stakes that they've only got so long to save the Star Hunter, and I feel that that really did add a whole lot to our game. Now, the adventure says that it's possible for the travelers to recover the Star Hunter in Chapter 7, but then it fails to explain how that's even possible. So when we get to that chapter later on, I'll explain how I made that possible for them to return to their ship and also to recover Amelia. But as far as Chapter 5, that is it for this episode. Now join us next time as the travelers experience 10,000 years and craft an entire civilization in a completely unconventional type of adventure, which is probably going to be the highlight of the entire playing experience for us for this campaign in Chapter 6, The Secret of the Ancients. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews, how-tos, or even more of this series on Secrets of the Ancients, just hit that subscribe button. If you want to support Seth's channel, consider picking up some of his books and novels, available in print and audiobook, and who knows, maybe you'll even enjoy them. Till next time, travelers, you have a great day. I think the biggest wasted opportunity this entire adventure is you should have absolutely killed a couple of us during that big battle defending the city. That way we could have come back as clones just a few hours later. In fact, you could have turned this entire adventure into some big game of paranoia as we're trying to get over to the graveyard and we're dying left and right and coming back again and again, sometimes with mutations. Skippy over there, he's taking on the role of friend computer and helping us out along the way, kind of like some sort of big mongoose mashup, that would have been freaking hilarious. Who am I kidding? We would have absolutely murdered your ass if you tried something like that.